Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. This is the Introduction to Research Writing for Arts and Humanities workshop. We have Dr. Linda Lister with us, Professor of Voice here at UNLV. And Dr. Lister is going to discuss strategies to help you enhance your writing and research specifically related to arts and humanities fields. So that is it for me. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Lister, for further introduction, and just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Great, thank you so much. All right, you can advance. So I assume people are having a great time in the boot camp and you're planning a research project. It could be a topic that's assigned to you by a professor, or it could be something that you've chosen yourself. So that obviously will have an impact on your research and your writing. And then, of course, is this a paper for a class, a course you're taking? Is this an article you're hoping to submit for publication? Is this a chapter of a book that you, again, hope to submit to or have been, commissioned to do? Or are you working on a larger project like a thesis or a dissertation? The D word, right? So first of all, you have to, kind of figure out those parameters. Most people, regardless of whether they're thinking of a paper or a dissertation, end up maybe having a topic that's a little broader than is actually feasible. And that's okay. So you start with the big picture and then you narrow down, you realize, oh, yeah, don't want to write about all of Shakespeare's plays or all of Mozart's operas. I've got to narrow this down. So that's a process. And some of that you'll figure out on your own. And some of that, hopefully you have advisors, committee members who could help you. So throughout this presentation, later on, we're going to do a little writing exercise. You don't have to have, doesn't have to be about this topic you might be thinking of, but just know that it's coming. We're going to do a little interactive writing, but don't panic, no pressure. So when you're doing your research, hopefully you have a system that works for you. So you're doing your research, you're taking notes, you'll get some ideas from those notes, things maybe that you want to explore more, or you have an aha moment that something you want to put in your paper and your writing, or maybe you're a bullet point person and you're just finding topics or terms or ideas that you want to have sort of in just a linear form there. I find it's really important to keep detailed notes, right, when you're doing your research. Very important. I like to even do the quotations that I'm thinking I will use as citations in my writing. And that's very important to make sure that they're accurate because you don't want to have any accidental plagiarism. So take careful notes. For instance, I've been working on an article on pop divas. I made up this term called divification, the worship of pop divas. And this is an interesting book I was reading by Lucy O'Brien, Shibop, kind of after the Cyndi Lauper song, if you know that one, Shibop, Shibop. Anyway, so I was reading the book and I kept, the page numbers of where I had some quotes. The notes in the brackets are to myself, what they were talking about. And then I kept the quote so that I knew where Lucy O'Brien's research stopped and where it started and stopped. So I could keep that separate from my own thoughts, obviously. So just a useful way to keep track of your citations, and then the URLs, especially these days, the wonderful Lead Library has so many ebooks I've noticed these days. So you don't have to file through an old-fashioned hard copy, but you might forget where it was where you were citing, or if you're doing research on other websites and you need to. So just keep copious notes. You can always delete what you don't need, but my experience has been have more than you think you need, and then you can pick and choose what you think works for your research. Anyway, so my Diva article is something that I've been enjoying writing, and hopefully it'll be published next year. So I know a lot of my students, they worry about what is the title of this article, this dissertation. I mean, you can have a title, pick one for now, but don't feel like you've committed to it for life. Because again, as you narrow your topic or as you change your topic, that title will change. I can almost guarantee it. So it's something that will evolve. Although obviously for a prospectus, if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, you will need to have a title, a working title at least for your prospectus. But no, that's not written in stone. And I always like to mention, I think I don't remember which movie star has a production company called Working Title Productions. And I always love that because, everything is a work in progress, right? But anyway, it can help guide you in your thoughts, but it will evolve and change as your research does. So next slide. So this is where most people I find hit the first roadblock. They've got some great research, they're excited about their topic, but then how do they put this into some organization, right? Unless you're a type A, left brain, Monica on Friends type person, right? So sometimes if you just outline it old school, which is also part of, if you're doing a dissertation, your table of contents is set up. The graduate college is a wonderful template set up for you there that you can use. But your introduction, your opening thoughts, and I still use a technique that I think I maybe learned in 8th grade. I don't know if people ever, if they still talk about the funnel paragraph. Does the grad college ever talk about that? Anyway, so that you start broad, and then in your introduction, you come down to a narrowed focal point of, this is what this paper will be, or this is what this dissertation will be. That it kind of helps guide you to your mission statement, your thesis statement, whatever you'd like to call it. Then pick out the sections that you want to cover. So in my divification article, first section I was talking about reviewing old divas of the past. In a previous article I'd written about divas, I was reviewing what happened to Whitney Houston, may she rest in peace, what happened to Mariah Carey, and what happened to Shania Twain. And then the second section was more about who are the new up and coming pop divas, who are the Taylor Swifts, the Olivia Rodrigos, etc. And then what does that mean? How are they, in the next section, how are they changing what diva is? So that's kind of my conclusion in that article. Now, of course, bibliography, if you kept all your notes, you'll have all of your research sources there, your resources. And if you're doing a thesis or a dissertation, obviously there could be an appendix. And several of the books I've published with Roman and Littlefield, they actually do online resources. So it's the book, they want you to keep your you can link to websites online, and they want you to keep those up to date, which was something I did not think, like a print book would still connect to online resources. So it's interesting how this is all evolving here in the 21st century. So you get your thoughts together, hopefully organized. And if it's all laid out in, bullet points, then you feel like you have a plan, kind of like your Google Maps. So you're not just heading out hoping you get to Boulder City and you're not sure how to get there, except it's that away. So writing, I've always loved writing, but I didn't always love writing in some ways. Who does, right? And I met an interesting person over the holiday. My dean, Nancy Usher, her husband, William P. Barrett, is a journalist, which I didn't know that. And I met him at a holiday party, and we were talking about writing, because I thought, well, journalism, that's so different than the kind of writing I do. And then he said to me, well, all writing is creative writing. And I thought, oh, that's he gave me permission to quote him. I thought, well, people don't talk about research writing as being creative, but why can't it be? It's original thought based on research, and you're going to create original ideas inspired by your research. So, and I love that, because my first writing was creative writing, like maybe some of you, when you wrote poetry or short stories or tried to write a novel. So just remember that you're still doing creative work. It is creative writing. And then, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the famous horror novelist Stephen King. It's interesting to know, I mean, he's a prolific writer, but he talks about here, the scariest moment is always just before you start writing, correct? So probably more scary if you're writing a horror novel. But anyway, even people who are very prolific and productive still get nervous about writing. So hopefully that will comfort you if you're there in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. looking at your computer, not knowing what you want to say. So, and if I picked up by now, I'm a Swiftie. So, and she apparently has said, you have to write 100 songs before you write the first good one. And I don't know the exact number of songs she has written, because these vault songs keep reappearing, and we'll have to keep updating our numbers, but there's truth to that. So you could write your first chapter, and you could throw it all out if you feel like it's not good, or you could reorganize it or re-envision it, repurpose it. I'm also a classical music singer and researcher, and there's a composer called Franz Schubert. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he wrote over 600 songs in his short 31 years on this planet. So, writing, people just sometimes feel like they have to write everything that they're inspired to do, and that's wonderful. But some of us, won't be as inspired, or you will be. So just enjoy the process and know that you don't always have to judge what you're writing at the moment. Write it, and then you can come back and see how you feel about it. And then, I don't know if you're familiar, I hope you are, with Nicole Hannah-Jones, who won the Pulitzer Prize for her research, the 1619 Project. When she was accepting that award, she said, she was talking about her, the essay that begins that book, this essay was the hardest thing. I had writer's block. See, even Pulitzer Prize winners have writer's block. And I don't know, she said, she literally thought I was going to die at some points, which, again, I can remember writing my dissertation. There were a few moments like that, but you will not die. You will survive, and your writing it will keep happening as long as you keep at it. So sometimes there are some helpful techniques that you could try. So writing for me is about discipline and creativity. So if you're coming at it from the discipline part, this is just one suggestion. You may or may not be familiar with the novelist Anthony Trollope. He's not as perhaps well known as Dickens or the Bronte sisters or others from that era, but is a British novelist who wrote 47 novels amongst many other writings. And I think at the time he was writing, he was also like working for the post office or something. So he had a day job too. So he had this technique where he would write for 15-minute intervals for 3 hours a day. So you can do the math there. So I guess his idea was he only had little moments or pockets of time where he could write, but it would add up to 3 hours a day. And even I know one of our voice students, Joshua Hager's on here. We talk about sometimes a similar thing with practicing voice. Like you don't want to go practice singing for 3 hours. You would be hoarse and have no voice left. But you could practice in half-hour increments or 45 or 15, whatever works for you. So this is, if you get stumped or you don't like having to sit for 1 hour and write, or 4 hours or whatever, everyone has their own system, right? So this could be a technique you could try, a timed writing technique. I know when I was writing my dissertation, I had to teach adjunct at a nearby college. So I would teach from 1 to 5 at that college, and then from, I think, 6 to 8 at a community music school. So in the morning, I would write. I would normally write for an hour after breakfast, and then I would give myself a break, at least a half hour or an hour if I wanted to go for a walk, and then come back. So I usually wrote for 2 hours in the morning. But you have your system. All right, yeah, so one technique for writing via time limits to help you get some work done and feel like you're productive. So next slide, thank you. So another technique, if you're not a fan of timing yourself, if that would make you paranoid or unproductive, is writing a certain number of pages. So you may or may not be familiar with this book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. Now, this is more of a book for, again, creative writing or novels, short stories, but you could still use it for this purpose as well. So she has a technique that she calls the morning pages. So in her practice, you write for 3 pages nonstop, stream of consciousness, not worrying about proper grammar or your perfect wording, just freestyle. You're just writing to sort of do the practice and make yourself write. And in her practice, she recommended doing it longhand on a legal pad. Of course, you wouldn't have to do that because most research writing, again, that would be not productive for that purpose. But that could be interesting if you're just trying to, something would be more again about the number of pages rather than a time. So check it out, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. So here we go. This is just an exercise I'd like you all to partake in. Don't worry, you won't have to share any of your writing. We'll talk about your responses to it afterwards, but don't feel like you have to. We're not going to ask you anything about the topic you pick or how many pages you write or how many words you write. It could be 5 words, but let's just do an exercise. So for 5 minutes or 1 page, you choose. So it could be that you prefer, we'll give you 5 minutes to do it, but don't feel pressured if you decide that after 3, you're done. Just to make yourself, as an exercise, try this. And this topic does not have to be an actual research topic you're working on right now. It could be, your thoughts on, maybe you saw, I don't know, maybe you saw a production of A Christmas Carol recently, or The Nutcracker, or you just read a really interesting book that you want to think about, or I'll leave the topic up to you. Again, you won't have to reveal it. So We'll take a 5-minute pause here. I will time it for us and come back in 5 minutes and see how this writing exercise went for you. So again, no judgment. You won't share what you're writing, but just as an exercise, open up your Word, Microsoft Word, or if you are a person who likes to scribble on a legal pad, go for it, or in your notes or whatever. So here we go. 5-minute writing exercise. Go. Great. All righty. So we can advance to the next slide. So I'm curious your responses, your feelings about it. How was it? I don't know if anyone has watched the HBO show Sex and the City. So Carrie Bradshaw is a columnist, and I know there's a point where she gets writer's block, and she's trying to write this one column, and it's something about men are socks in the city. And she's writing socks, and then she writes, this column sucks. I remember we can all relate to that. Or there's just nothing we can write. But I'm sure you wrote something. So tell them, you can write in the chat, I guess, either do you want them to write to the Grad Academy, those comments, or how would you like to do that, Alyssa?
Yeah, feel free to, feel free to unmute if you just want to
Oh,
chime
that as
in.
well. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Or in the chat to everybody, or in the chat directly to me if you want to be anonymous.
yeah, whatever way you're comfortable, just responses to the timed writing, which is something I also have my students do when they're preparing for their comprehensive exams, when they're going to have to write essays on the fly, especially, some people have writer's block or fear of writing, but particularly international students who maybe aren't as accustomed to having to write an essay in what is not their non-native tongue. So
Yeah,
comments, thoughts.
one response just to me, that it was so much easier because it was a topic of their choice.
Of course, absolutely. And I recognize that. And the further you get along in graduate school, the more likely you are to be able to pick your own topic. But of course, if you're taking a class in Charles Dickens, you just might have to write on Great Expectations, whether you like the book or not, right? But it's good practice, sometimes just to practice on a familiar topic, right? And then maybe that topic, you can come back to that later in your writing career, your research career. So good point, though. That's why pick a dissertation topic if you do that, something you love, because you'll be writing many, many things about it. I'm curious if people did more of like just the page or the times. And let's see,
Yeah.
learned some insights about my anxious inner critic. Yes. Let's see, telling me I'm behind, demotivating. Yes, you reflected on quotes, good, that were shared. Taylor Swift, good. Yeah, so that's the point. Sometimes, even though I understand, I've been there, I've written books, I've had editors rip my writing apart, reorganize it. And that's something we all have to experience and learn to not take it personally, right? Even if it is personal and that we love the topic or it's our original thought, but sometimes, yeah, you just have to don't judge yourself. That's why I think the morning pages idea works, or just write something, and then we can always change it. You can always write something different, but you might actually unlock some wonderful insights locked deep within your amazing brain if you don't always critique it and censor it. So good. Any other thoughts before we proceed? Is anybody writing on Dickens? No, probably not. Who knows? So finding your voice. Oh, let's see. Oh, somebody wrote a letter. Okay, wonderful. I won't ask to whom, but that's actually interesting. In my opera workshop class that I teach, students do in the introductory level, they do a character analysis in which I ask them to write a journal entry as one of their characters. But a letter is another interesting way to do it. So I don't know if it was a letter to Charles Dickens or Taylor Swift or or Pablo Picasso or Nicole Hannah-Jones, who knows? But yeah, just find different ways to get the creativity going. Love it. So we're trying to find our voice, and this is something that can be intimidating at first. So, you don't want to be passive. You want to get your own voice shown through. So this is what now we're talking about style, right? So I'm sure I write a particular style that's different from you or your professor. So we want to be able to identify the writing style, but you don't want it to be too haphazard. So being consistent is very important without being redundant. And what you can do is you can, after you've done your writing, maybe waited a day, come back and see if you see patterns. Do you see sentence structures that are the same? Are you using similar words over and over? I had a writing teacher in college who did this with me. And again, it was humbling at first, but it showed me how, oh yes, I was maybe being too repetitive, and I could still keep my voice and find what I wanted to say, and with a little bit more variety. And this is something else I remember struggling with, even though you're trying to show your viewpoint, making sure that you're not saying, I think this, or when I sang this opera role, or when I did this. Of course, you don't want to use first person, but you could always find research to back up your thoughts. And that's one of my favorite things in writing is I know I have an original idea and I will state it. I won't say, I think this, I would say research shows, or, works like this reflect, and then find someone else that agrees with you or that you can amplify and blossom on that thought. And I wouldn't name any names, but when I was doing my dissertation, a professor, I remember, said to me that she didn't like my dissertation because it was too interesting, it was too entertaining. And I remember thinking, is that bad? I guess in her mind, research writing was supposed to be boring and dry. And I think that has changed. People know that now, yeah, not that it has to be professional, it has to be, relevant, but it can still be interesting, can still be creative. And so I think that's an old school thought. So hopefully no one will say that to you about your writing, and hopefully, or luckily, the other people on my committee were supportive of my writing, and that dissertation did go on to win a prize from a national organization. So maybe I changed her mind about research writing. We'll see. I never asked her. So, but find your voice, because we don't want you just to regurgitate what you've read or what your teachers, your professors, other researchers say. You can use their research to prove your points, and that's kind of the most fun part in a way of writing. Like, then you feel like you are part of that thread of research. And then the best thing is when you see someone else quote your dissertation or your article. The first couple of times I saw that, I feel like I had arrived. I'd entered the room, as it were. And of course, I always tell my students, when they send me their dissertation and it says final draft, I'm like, uh-oh, you've just jinxed it. It's never the final draft when you say it's the final draft, just version 51 or whatever it is. So editing, proofing, so important and so difficult. I know that from my own experience, sometimes there are egregious typos in my writing that I don't see because I'm in it, I'm writing it, or I've cut and pasted something and I'm filling in what I thought was there before. So check it, double check it, triple check it, and definitely get other people to read it so that you have fresh eyes. They're not seeing filling in the gaps, basically. Of course, hopefully your committee, if they're your advisory committee, if you're working on a dissertation or thesis, or another advisor that you have can help you with that. And then if you're working on a larger project, some professors do like to read chapters before you submit them to your entire advisory committee. I know I do. I don't want to go to the committee and I see something, like, oh, I could have fixed that, or I could have shown them that was, that wasn't in perfect order there. So, but again, you have to take it all in. It's not personal. Editing is just refining, but you can never edit enough. And unfortunately, final projects and papers and dissertations, sometimes even if it's been edited by seemingly a million people, 10 years later, you're going to find an error in it or something. And you're like, oh, how did we miss that? But it's just really hard. So much detail. But yeah, enjoy the edit and seemingly never stop it. So let's see if there are any questions in the chat. Oh, just people laughing at my bad jokes. Good. So questions, we obviously have some time to discuss. And I'm open to any thoughts or ruminations on research writing for arts and humanities.
I'm not seeing anything yet, but I guess I would put it out there. What are some key differences in approaches versus like science or STEM based writing?
Right. So most often, in my experience, I've written books about opera, about song composition, about yoga, about literature through the Bronte sisters. Trying to think what else, sort of the main topics. So definitely arts and humanities, voice pedagogy as well, and voice repertoire a lot. So when you're thinking about that, the research you're doing isn't about scientific studies, right? Um, so you're quoting other editors, analysts who have read these works or analyzed them. And it's important to know, whatever the topic is, who are the big names that write about that. So, for instance, when I was writing about these divas, there's a famous musicologist who was a big feminist musicologist. So, right, including her research showing that I know that lineage. So, just make sure you know who the big names are that you would be reading and perhaps quoting and reflecting on, but then trying to find some more modern takes on it, so that it's not all based in older research there. But again, it's interesting because I know some of my other voice colleagues do more science-based research in that they're talking about vocal health and maybe studying the effects of certain things on the voice. See, someone's saying they wrote a great paper about dance majors and difficulty of careers. Yeah. So sometimes there would be studies, but most often, even if there are studies, they're more of a survey type thing rather than, I'm thinking like in the medical school, they're testing how drugs work over a certain number of years, or how does cancer treatment go? So it's artsy schmartsy. It's what did this person say about this book or this piece of music? So there's more freedom in a way, because there's more opinion, because it's not fact-based. It's not that this book proved, this. No, it's what do you think about this book or this piece of music? See, someone else said, do you have a certain system for tracking your writing progress? Yes. I would, again, whichever system, time or pages, I would say you could do. And if you have a deadline, so say you have a paper, that is due on a certain date, or and it could be a shorter timeline, right? If it's a research paper, it's due by the midterm or by the end of the semester, or your document is due by the end of the school year. Your prospectus is due mid-year. Yeah, writing in a calendar and saying, I want these chapters written by this point. So I always give myself very specific deadlines like that. Chapter 3 by February 3rd, chapter 4 by March 15th, things like that. But some people that might intimidate them. But for most of us, I think deadlines that are self-generated, knowing the final deadline. And I'm thinking the deadline changes, but I think for the graduate college, like for instance, the dissertation has to be approved by your committee, usually by like April 15th for graduation. Is that about right, Alyssa? Do you think? It's usually around then.
Yeah, well ahead of time, yeah.
Yeah, so that means, I mean, if that's when it, again, and that won't be the final version, because when you send it to the grad college, then formatting other checks, but that means your committee sees what it is and they are happy with it as it stands. So that means, wow, you've got to plan, you got to, go from there and go back in time for your deadlines. Yeah, deadlines, breaking it down to little increments. I see someone saying, always depend on availability of others. Yeah. Oh, this is another funny story, I'll tell you. So when I was doing my dissertation, I lived a block at UNCG in North Carolina. I lived a block from campus, and I actually lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building right next to my advisor's house. And I could see her dining table, and I could see when she was sitting there reading. And some days I'd look out, like, why isn't she reading my chapter 5? I sent it to her 2 weeks ago. That's kind of creepy, I know. A little stalker-esque, but yeah, that's true. So you can't assume that your professors or your editors in the professional world necessarily can turn around as quickly as you would like. So I always say, turn it in way before, make things earlier. So then you give yourself a buffer if you are running behind or they are running behind. But yeah, but the time crunch is real. We've all been there at the last moment. I try, I'm not a procrastinator. It stresses me out, but that's when you need to find your voice. That's true. Yeah. Write a letter. Dear Dr. Walker, hand deliver it. Please read my paper. Yeah.
I do have one more direct chat that came through.
Sure.
Um, so when going through the publication process, journal or otherwise, incorporating feedback is important. Do you have any recommendations for when the feedback runs directly contrary to what you're trying to convey and you don't feel like you can make the requested change without fundamentally changing your work in a way you are not comfortable with?
Wow. That's such a good question. Sounds like someone went through that experience, perhaps. Well, it's interesting. The journal and the book process are different. When I've had books published, there was a proposal that was approved beforehand. So it was very clear to them what the tone was or what the subject was. And in that case, I've never experienced someone completely changing what I was writing. So I guess that's the easier way. But that's sort of a later step, probably having a book published. With the article submission process, yeah, I mean, I submitted an article back in August and I still haven't heard. That's pretty normal, right? Um, and yes, so I guess it's a matter of if they wrote back to me and they said, you need to change your thesis or we refute this area, this part, it would just be a matter of whether if it changed my research and my thoughts so fundamentally, I couldn't stomach it. I guess I would decline and try to submit it somewhere else. But it just depends if you could negotiate that. And I know that's especially with young writers, academicians, you might not want to say no, right? Because we're like, please publish me, publish or perish. But I know with this article, if they don't like my take, I have other plans for it because that's just the way it goes, right? They might not agree, and I've been to conferences where I've presented papers and seen people refuted and attacked, in the Q&A. And that's academia, right? Everyone can have their own opinion. So you'd have to make your own call. And if it fundamentally changes what you have and you're not comfortable, you can move on and you can find another platform. It may hurt and it may take longer, but I would stand by my guns. Other thoughts, questions? Do people like writing? Do they enjoy writing? I hope so, even if not all the time. Hope you get some pleasure from it. I don't want to single out Josh, but I'm seeing him there. What's your process, Josh?
I put it off to the last minute and see what my brain can do. I'm kidding. No, I actually really, really like the, just brain dump, just let me write something, put it on paper, because also I'm really big on I should have had this done, or even if I have all the time in the world, I just kind of stress myself out. So if I have material that even if it's just brain dump material, at least it gives me a starting point to continue going on. And I'm one of those people that also likes to try to find as many different sources just to say the same thing. Like I'll have 10 different sources saying the same thing.
Right.
I won't put them all in, but I just love finding a bunch of different things. And because even if it is saying the same thing, they might say it 10 different ways. So that's one thing that I really, really like doing. But whenever I pace myself, I try to, okay, pages is usually the thing that works for me, because sitting there with the timer and then, oh, the timer's on my phone. Okay, time to get on my phone. But yeah.
Yeah, I just had another thought. We were talking about finding your voice and then relating back to what I think Cecilia was talking about. You can have your voice, which is you. That doesn't mean that you can't, aim it a certain way or angle it or pivot it to fit certain publications, right? If your professor, likes a certain way of approaching things, maybe you do it that way. Or when I was two of the books I actually co-wrote with a colleague. So we were trying to blend our style a little bit, so it didn't seem like, you know, he wrote this chapter and she wrote this chapter. And you know, knowing the publication you're aiming for, you would want to make sure you've looked at the publication, read it, and see what their general style is. Not that everyone's going to write exactly the same way, but just again, from a voice perspective, as an opera singer, if I went and sang an opera aria in the style of Taylor Swift, that wouldn't go over so well. Same way, if I sang a Taylor Swift song in an opera style, that would be weird. Even though it's my same actual singing voice. So your writing voice, you can still explore different ways of doing it, but maintain some of your core and your integrity. Again, just to be versatile, and if you are trying to get published in certain venues.
Yeah, this is totally right. Before I get into graduate school, I used to be a journalist. I used to write for a newspaper. I was representative for the West Coast and the magazine newspaper run there in the East Coast. And of course, every month we come up a issue, and that is going to talk about this and that. And you have to put the things in the terms that you want to send a message,
right?
About that topic as well. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to succumb to write any note. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. So yeah, so academic writing.
But writing graduate school I had to adapt, because the way I used to write was pretty much like a reporter, like a journalist, and when you are in graduate school and you're writing papers, you can write, but you have to follow some format, and
yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. So there are different formats, like I said, for your singing voice and then for your writing voice, similar thing. So yeah, so just differentiate. Just even if you think about, there's a different, my husband, who's also a UNLV professor, he writes TV shows and movies, and even a TV show and a movie have a different format, different length. Are they built for commercials or not? So for academic writing is different than journalistic writing, which is different than writing a novel. Even though it's all creative, like we said, going back to that quote from the journalist. But yeah, you got to figure out the formula for each, right? But then maintain your creativity and voice in whichever format that you are writing at that moment. I still think research writing can be fun. That's the hill I'm going to die on. It doesn't have to be, inducing sleep. Because again, I've been to many academic conference, where you would think they were debating life or death of the planet, but no, it was just what this Bronte sister said or this Bronte sister said. So,
do you find it challenging writing? I mean, I don't know if you have several projects going on at one time and you go between them, or do you find it challenging to go from a focus to another focus? Like, I'm writing Singers for Yoga book #2, and now I'm also going to write a sequel to my opera, or I'm going to get a second doctorate. Do you find it challenging, kind of like changing those focuses, or putting yourself into those different brains, or are they different brains to you? If I worded that.
I'm definitely not getting a second doctorate. I'm not that but I think it's again, I see it as switching styles. So like I sing opera, but I also love to sing musical theater. So there's something that's similar, but something that's different. So there were times when I was writing one of my books or co-writing one of my books where I was composing some music or writing a libretto. So that's words. So the words part would maybe be more related, but so it's a related muscle, but slightly different. I'm a soprano. Yes. But for me, creativity is all sort of just part of the same conduit. So maybe there are little variances, but I feel like whether I'm writing an academic article or a libretto that someone's going to sing, I kind of feel like I'm on the same trajectory and there's only a finite amount of time each day that I could be creative. And then I do the teaching part, or the performing part. But for me, it's the same. For other people, it may be like they go to a totally different room in their brain. But for me, it's like, this is my creative time. And it could be one of these things that pops out of my head. But I don't know, but others may be different or similar.
Thank you.
But one doctorate's enough, I think, for now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today and, sharing your guidance and also amazing stories. Very entertaining as well. We really appreciate it. And for boot camp folks, you can come back to the Remo room. Technically, our day ends at 4 here, but you can come back. I'll keep the room open till 5 if you're feeling inspired to get into some writing for the rest of the day. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow morning at 9. And this recording will be added to the Web Campus course for the bootcamp and also our YouTube channel for future reference. So thank you all, and thank you again, Dr. Lister.
Thank you. Good luck with your writing. Best of luck.